delivery systems for school construction today that are being used with bond money. And so the third one is lease-leaseback. We've heard a lot about that over the last couple of years. It's really risen in its predominance. And lease-leaseback is not a new school construction delivery method. The original statutes that authorized it were enacted in the late 1950s. And basically, they were enacted by the legislature to give school districts an alternative method to finance their school construction. Remember, back in the 50s, public agencies still had those same debt limitations. They could not incur more debt than they were able to carry based upon revenue. And so what the legislature did is said, listen, you can enter into a lease and a lease-back transaction with a developer, and you can basically take your school site or some other specified site that you have the right to purchase, and you can lease it out to someone for a nominal fee. They can then build the school facility that you desire pursuant to your plans and specifications that have been approved by the Division of State Architects. And then they bear all the cost, the upfront costs of that construction. And then once the construction is done, they can lease that facility back to you, and you, the school district, can pay for it over time through current revenues. And so therefore, your present debt obligation to pay for that school construction project never exceeds what your current revenues available to pay for it are. And so that was in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. In the 70s and 80s, lease-leaseback started to become less and less prevalent because of alternative bond financing. School districts were able to go out and either pass general obligation bonds or now with regard to Prop 39 bonds, and they were able to get the money all at once up front necessary to fund their construction. So they no longer needed to enter into these lease-leaseback transactions in order to fund their construction. And so I've just kind of summarized what the process was. However, that's changed now within the last 10 years. Lease-leaseback has basically made a resurgence. For instance, where I'm from in San Diego, there's 42 school districts, and I'm told that more than 30 of those school districts are using lease-leaseback on many, if not all, of their projects of large scale. I've seen those some as small as a couple $100,000, $900,000 HVAC replacement in Oceanside. And so, again, we'll later on talk about whether or not that makes good public policy sense, but right now we're just kind of setting the groundwork. So the lease-leaseback contracting process is, it requires, as I said, the two contracts, the site lease, whereby the school district transfers its property, and then the sublease, whereby the school district pays the contractor, pays the developer, and gets the property back. And so it's through the sublease agreement that the school district pays for construction. In your materials, I've included a sort of a diagram that depicts the two contracts. The site lease is up on top, the sublease is on the bottom. Under the site lease, you have the contractor, I'm sorry, the district is on the left side, the contractor is on the right side of the transaction. So with regard to the site lease, the school building starts with the school district. And basically, the arrow going across to the contractor is they are transferring the right to occupy and utilize that property to the contractor. And in return, the contractor is paying them some nominal sum, usually $1 a year. That's with regard to the site lease. And that's necessary to get the property under the legal control of the contractor so the contractor can enter it and do what he needs to do. The second part of the transaction is the sublease agreement. And under that transaction, the school now belongs to the contractor because of the site lease up above. And so the contractor, developer, leases the school district back to the district, that's the top arrow, gives them back the right to occupy that property. And the bottom arrow is, in return, the district pays them an agreed upon amount of rent. Therein lies the issue that we're going to deal with regard to the current use of lease-leaseback. This slide is actually later on in your materials, but I moved it up in my presentation to now, and I'm not sure how well you can see that. But it's basically, back in 2004, the State Allocation Board first noticed the increase in use of lease-leaseback and started to question why was this being used this way. And what they found was that the leaseback statutes were being interpreted, I contend incorrectly, to circumvent and avoid the need for competitive bidding. That was what the prevalent and still prevalent assertion is that you don't need to do competitive bidding if you are doing lease-leaseback. And so again, these are the arguments in favor, pulled from the State Allocation Board, which is an exhibit to what I call Exhibit A. And it's basically that you can have a guaranteed maximum price, you can have a team approach, you get to know who your contractor is in advance prior to entering into a contract with them, and you don't have to have a lot of your own staff to monitor this process. Also, the final pro of lease-leaseback, as it's currently being promoted, is you get the opportunity for some value engineering. Basically, the contractor can work with your design professional to make suggestions for modifications to the design in order to basically save money in one location and spend that money in another location. That's the concept of value engineering. However, the State Allocation Board, in their memo, and they do a very good job of outlining objectively the pros and the cons. They talk about that, how some of the concerns are that it's questionable as to whether or not they're following the proper competitive bidding processes and procedures in the award of these projects. And so, back into our PowerPoint slides here, the proponents of lease-leasebacks assert that the law authorizes the school district to lease their property without advertising for bids. And so basically the proponents assert that they can, under the statute, which I'll show you in a second, 17406, they contend that 17406 authorizes a school district to lease their property without competitive bids, so long as it provides for the contractor to build the building and lease it back to the school district. This is the actual code section that's being relied upon. It's the 17406. And part of my legal argument is that 17417, which we'll talk about in just a second, has a number of different steps that the public agency has to take with regard to the sublease. And I contend it's that section that requires the competitive bidding and the award only to the lowest bidder. However, the legislature, in their, quote, infinite wisdom, close quote, has drafted this statute in such a way to what I contend, create some ambiguity, because the first thing they say, as my esteemed opposing counsel who are here today always point out to the judges when we go challenge this, well, Mr. Carlin, right there at the very beginning of Education Code 17406, it says, notwithstanding 17417, notwithstanding the very statute that you contend requires competitive bidding, the legislature exempted these types of leaseback transactions from that. And so again, we will have to get that statutory interpretation, that legal question hammered out at the courts. But I contend that 17406 relates only to the site lease. Remember that first agreement. And the reason I say that is because the phrase let, it contains the phrase, the school district may let its property out for purposes of construction. And if we look at the normal English usage of the word let, it's a verb. If you look in any dictionary, the word let, although it has other connotations also, the most applicable one in this circumstance is a verb. And it means to let out, to lease. And so New Webster's says that the word let means to permit, to allow, to permit to enter, pass, go, to rent, or to lease. And so I contend that by using the word let, the legislature expressly intended 17406 to apply solely to the site lease portion of the transaction. That's the one where the school district is transferring its legal right.